What is up, everyone? Biz Matthew here. Today I'm going to be talking about Trump banning institutional home buying. Specifically, he came out last week stating that he's looking into banning institutional investors from buying single family homes. We're going to look up the stats. How many institutional investors actually own single families in the US market? And we'll also learn what impact does that have for home buying, right? And on the housing market. And I also talk about wholesale real estate. So we'll talk about its impact on wholesaling real estate. Make sure you all like this video, subscribe, comment down what you all think of Trump. I think this is an ideal that both sides can come together, the left and the right, where they can agree upon this policy. And this is great, especially now that we're in a world where we're more divided than ever. It's good that we have some sort of policies that can bring us together. So what impact or what will you think this will drive home prices? Let me know in the comments down below in the chat or whatnot. And I'm going to share my screen with you here, and we're going to talk all about it and talk about what he said and the implications around Trump potentially looking to ban single family homes or institutional investors buying single family homes. So let me share my screen with you all, and we can go over this article. All right, so I'm right here and on CNBC. Let me get this a little bit larger for you all. All right. So Trump says U.S. to ban large investors from buying homes. Large investors are investors that buy 100 homes or more, usually. People live in homes, not corporations. So I've always heard of this case. You hear of the YouTubers, influencers that say this is a huge problem in America, institutional investors buying up homes, single family homes, and that drives up prices. So we'll look more into the data about where institutional investors are buying and how, do they really drive up home prices? And let me know in the chat, do you all see that in your neighborhood? Institutional investors, they're buying homes around your area, and that's impacting home prices or, just overall the housing market. So he said, the U.S. should bar large institutional investors from buying single-family homes, arguing that corporate ownership has helped push housing further out of reach for everyday Americans. And, Trump is really concentrating on affordability, right? That's been the buzzword. And a lot of people are pushing back at him, saying he's not focusing on that. So obviously he's looking to focus that to bring more people on his side and whatnot. So let's see if this gets passed, what happens with all this. So this is what he put on Truth Social, his essential tweet. So for a very long time, buying and owning a home was considered a pinnacle of the American dream, right? It was the reward for working hard and doing the right thing. But now, because of the record high inflation caused by Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress, he had to put that in. He could have just deleted that. But, it's both sides doing stuff like this. So I'm not even going to go that deep into it. But that American dream is increasingly out of reach for far too many people, especially younger Americans. All right. It is for that reason and much more that I am immediately taking steps to ban large institutional investors from buying more single-family homes. And I will be calling on Congress to codify it. People live in homes, not corporation. Okay, most have argued that these investments have reduced housing supply for would-be homeowners and help drive up prices. So those are the two main factors people are focusing on, that these institutional investors are lowering the housing supply and also increasing home prices. So Invitation Homes, which is the largest renter of single-family homes in the country, tumbled 6%. Shares of Blackstone, an investing firm that owns and rents. So Blackstone is different from BlackRock, you all, just letting you all know. They dropped more than 5%. Private equity firm Apollo also declined 5%. So a lot of these companies that buy single family homes start to drop in prices, right? So the national medium existing single family home price is 426. It's pretty expensive. Record high 435 in this past summer. Interest rates are right 6.19. So Blackstone, largest private equity owner of apartments in the US with more than 230,000 units. That's a ton. That's a good amount. But we'll look into how many homes are there actually in America and how does that compare to that, right? So Trump did not provide details. So this is just a tweet he put out. 2026 must be a year we get housing affordability right for working families. And so, of course, he's going to try to uh, drive down all of that. So what I want to talk about is the percentage of institutional investors. So this is this great article here, and this is based off of recent stats. So this is how many units institutional investors actually own in the United States of America. All right, so August 2025 reports found that institutional investors, those owning 100 plus rental homes, were relatively a minor player in the single family housing market. An updated analysis of these data show that as of November 2025, institutional investors own only 1% of the nation's single family housing stock, a level unchanged over the 21 months since March of 2024. Further, over the 21 months, large institutional investors acquired 178,000 and sold 185 rental homes, resulting in a 7,000 home drop in their total portfolios. So, homes they acquired total less than 2% of all single family home sales over the period. So, essentially, institutional investors, I've been reading stats online, own between 1 and 3% of single family homes in America. And so, is that a big deal for people? We'll look more into the data, but in the grand scheme of things, my personal opinion is that it's not. I know, especially during the pandemic, they were buying a ton. And so they started selling off a lot when interest rates started going higher and the demand for single family homes went down. And so that's why you saw these big companies started to sell single family homes for a loss. I actually saw that in my market and other markets because they were doing some cheap flips and other things of that nature, or just renting it out, and it just wasn't making money for them. But they still own a decent amount. 3% of the whole single family market is around, I believe it was around 450 or around 450 to 500,000 homes. So if investors don't own that, that's 500,000 homes essentially that is available for people looking to buy a home. And so that is a good amount, even though 1 to 3% isn't a lot, it still counts for something. And we have to take that with a grain of salt. So you see the number of acquisition and disposition by institutional investors over the past 21 months. So the orange is disposition, selling, and then the blue is acquisition, which is them buying. And so a lot of times they would have more selling than buying. Maybe they're flipping the homes, or I think these are rentals actually, but it's been going down. So essentially they've been acquiring less and less single family homes since 2024. All right. So it's, I think people can be subjective to, okay, is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? And whatnot. So, but one thing I want to highlight is where in certain areas of America, institutional investors are way much bigger and hold a bigger market share in that area. And so we're going to explore that right now using this. Okay, all right, major investors own a tiny share of the overall U.S. single-family rental, but their ownership is heavily concentrated in southern Sun Belt cities. So if you're in the South, if you're in these areas, you may see it more, and you may think it's a bigger deal, but nationwide, it's a tiny share of the overall. So that's why you may think, oh, this will help us so much, and it may help you if you live in these certain areas. So overall, major investors own only about 2 to 3% of the single-family stocks. All right, 2023, defined as those who own over 1,000 homes, right? So a 2023 report by the Hamilton Project, which is part of the Brookings Institution, found that mega investors, those who own more than 1,000 homes, own nearly 10% of total rental units in the Atlanta metro area and 27% of all single family home rentals. They own 22% of the single family rental stock in Jacksonville and nearly 20% in Charlotte. So you have these Sunbelt areas in the South, and you see them right here. And for example, Atlanta, mega investors own 71,000 properties. Single family rentals is around 27%. And then share of all rental properties is just under 10%. And so in these bigger cities, yeah, you're seeing, and that's where most people flock to. People flock to Atlanta, they flock to Charlotte, they flock to Nashville, and you see the percentages are way much higher in these areas than nationwide, right? And so people in these areas may be thinking, yeah, they're buying up all our homes. And that's probably true because there are full neighborhoods in Atlanta where it's just a big company and they own all the homes and they rent them all out. And people are saying, okay, this is driving the price. Why can't you sell me this home? Things of that nature. But, people are still renting them, right? They're not, and they're renting them maybe because they can't afford it. But some people actually do prefer renting over buying. And so, yeah, you see these areas, and you see the percentage between how much they own for single family rentals. So let me also highlight something. So right here where it says mega investor share of the single family rental property. So they're looking at only rental properties. They're not looking at home owner occupied properties, right? They're looking at all rental properties. So institutional investors, those who own 1,000 or more, they own 10% of rental properties. And this other percentage right here, the 3.89 are share of all rental properties. So that includes multifamilies. So the first percentage is all single families, just one home, right? It's not an apartment building. And the second percentage is of multifamilies included in that stat. So your apartment buildings, your duplexes, your quads, and things of that nature. And so you see that. So you can see a lot of institutional investors own a good amount of properties in those markets. So the report found that 354,000 of the total 446 single family homes owned by mega investors were located in 20 markets. So out of all the markets in America, most of them are owned in only 20 markets, right? So you even see in big cities like Chicago, New York City, not even LA, have such a high percentage of institutional investors. But granted, they probably have super high housing, right? Or maybe they have more affordable housing, but not really. New York City or LA, I'm not sure why they don't, and institutional investors are not buying in there. And we'll see, because there's another group of people that actually own more rental properties that we'll highlight and break down even more. So, you don't really want to have highly concentrated ownership of the rental market with a couple landlords who have market power. And if you get to a small enough area of geography, it's certainly possible that a big institutional investor could wind up kind of having a quasi monopoly. So that's what you see in places like Atlanta. I research properties in that area, and there are rows of housing that's just owned by institutional investors. Now, another thing that I want to show is that, let me see, it's the next one. Small investors. So your small investors, your mom and pop shop, they dominate the single family home market. They are increasing their amount of owning properties, single family homes in a certain area. And I'm part of that stat, I guess, right? But the thing is, you have to understand that you probably know them. They probably go to your church, or they go to your school, or you work with them. These are people who maybe they have 5 rental properties and maybe they got it through an inheritance, or they just over time just bought a house, they moved on to another house, they didn't want to sell it and they rented it out. So these are not people necessarily trying to, just be super greedy and just take up everything. They may be just regular people. Maybe some of them are greedy. I don't know. But this is the stat. A striking 33% of single family homes were bought by investors in Q2 of 2025, a 5-year high. So a third of all single family homes were bought by investors, right? These small investors. And that's a lot of people, right? So if you want to have some regulation, should you go for institutional investors or smaller investors? But the thing is, smaller investors probably don't have a ton of money. You'll be surprised, even though I have a single family, probably a rental property that I'm under the stat, even though I didn't really buy one last year, but I'm not greedy, and some years I lose money on the house, right? Why should I be banned from buying a home when I'm not a billionaire, I'm not a millionaire or anything like that. So uh, it's just interesting. It's just interesting. So real estate investors purchased 33%. All right, according to batch data. Oh, batch data. Interesting. The market overwhelmingly controlled by small investors. Owners of just 1 to 5 properties account for 87% of all investor owned homes, the report found. Another 4% belongs to those with 6 to 10 properties. By contrast, large institutional players with portfolios exceeding 1,000 homes control 2% of the market. So the perception that institutional investors are gobbling up the nation housing stock is overstated. And it's probably true. So who do you all want to go after? You want to go after small investors that own 1 to 5 properties, or institutional investors that own 1,000 or more, but they only account for 2% of the market, right? Or owners, they have more, but there's multiple of them, right? You probably have family members who are in this stat, right? What are you all's thoughts on that? That these small investors, they are gobbling up single family homes, and it's probably driving up prices, right? It's probably cutting the supply down. But at the same time, why would I go after them when they're just trying to make a living for their family, right? You're not going to get uber wealthy with 5 rental properties, and maybe depending on what area you're in and things of that nature, but you're not going to be on the same level as these institutional investors. So percent of homes purchased by investors. So you're seeing this, it just went up. Okay, the surge is largely driven by mom and pop investors focusing on lower price single family homes despite larger institutions being net sellers. Even as investor share rise, total numbers of homes sold to investors actually fell, right? About 16,000 fewer properties changed hands in Q2 compared to a year ago, right? Geographically, the largest pool of investor-owned homes are in Texas, California, Florida. States with the highest percentage of single-family home owned by investors include by investors. The largest pools. Okay, percentage. Okay, there's pools and percentage. I was wondering. Okay, Hawaii, Alaska, Montana. So in Hawaii, 26% of the homes are owned by investors. In Maine, 31% of the homes are owned by investors. Interesting. No, they're not saying institution investors are mom and pop. This article right here is highlighting that institutional investors only account for 2% of all single family homes, but mom and pop investors, usually those who own 1 to 10 properties, bought 33% of all single family homes in Q2 of 2025, right? So the majority of homes that are not homeowner homes are bought by small time investors. So they're saying in a way that institutional investors are not a huge problem to the issue. So banning them from buying single family homes may still keep home prices around the same price, and may still, keep supply around the same amount. Because even though 1 to 3% is still a good deal, because that's maybe 500,000 homes, it may not be a big role as people think. All right. And so this is another article highlighting that too. While investors purchased more homes than they sold in the second quarter, they did sell over 104,000 homes, with 45% of those going to traditional home buyers. All right. So investors are buying homes, but the majority of the investors buying homes are mom and pop investors. People like me and you. You probably know of these people and whatnot. All right. So we'll see. We'll see. It may be a play to get more votes and other things of that nature. But I want to highlight another thing about this article right here, where they say, okay, institutional investors may not be in the issue, but these may be an issue, and banning them won't help lower prices or increase supply. So what will help for affordability, right? And so these are the different things they have, right? Building homes on smaller lots can greatly add supply and improve affordability, right? That's one thing. You can just lessen the red tape around building in certain areas. That can be another thing. So institutional investing may not be a huge deal, and may not, banning that may not have a huge impact on home prices, which people want, right? People want home prices to get lower. They want more supply. They want better affordability in the housing market, but it may not make a big difference, right? I don't think there should be any banning of mom and pop people, small time investors buying up homes, right? Because once again, you're taking, money from your mom and pop person and you're giving it to richer people, right? If you decide to do that, I don't think that would be a good deal to go after mom and pop investors either. And so, yeah, how does this impact wholesale real estate? If this is passed, you have to understand, because as a wholesaler, let's say you buy and sell homes, right? You're finding a cash buyer. People for the past 5 years have increasingly been selling their deals, disposing their properties over to institutional investors. Now, if this thing is passed where they ban single family homes, you will no longer be able to sell or dispose your wholesale deals to these institutional investors, to these hedge funds, right? And so that could drive down your profit, because let's say they're just paying you way more than a regular mom and pop investor, right? Now you have to go and find somebody. You may need to look at a whole new market. So that can change things for wholesale real estate. That's how it can impact wholesale real estate, because some people exclusively sell to hedge funds, to institutional investors. And that's where they get the bulk of their business. So if this thing is passed, that will be lessened for sure. Stop using the clickbait titles. Clickbait titles. I'm on the subject of Trump talking about banning institutional investors from buying homes. All right, you all. So I want to go back to renters, right? Because obviously institutional investors, they rent their homes, right? They're buying up these homes, and people are saying, oh, you're buying up our homes, right? We want to buy them. And they probably can't buy them because they're in an expensive market, right? They can't afford it. And that's why they're blaming them, because they say they drive up the prices. Now, many renters want to own but don't expect to. So this is this very interesting chart that they gave. So prefer owning. So they're tied here, 2019 and 2025. They're about to say they increased a little bit in 2025, that slightly more people do prefer owning homes. Now, very difficult to obtain a home. And you see that right here. Now it's between 40 and 50%, whereas before, just 6 years ago, according to this graph, it was between 20 and 30%. Now, probability of buying a home in the future was way much higher, over 50% in 2019, but in 2025, it's less than 40%. So people still want to buy a home, right? So people still have a desire, there's a demand there, but people think, banning institutional investors from buying homes may help this, may be able to help them get a home and lower price. So I don't know. My personal opinion is I'm not sure if this will get passed because when you look at the stats, institutional investors own 1 to 3%. And this may just be a policy where Trump can use to bring more votes to him because people's been complaining that he's not focusing on affordability. And that's been an issue that he needs to address in 2026. And so he's addressing it. Maybe he'll put some policies, some rules around it, but I don't know. I think it's going to be difficult for them to actually pass that because one, the investors of that kind just own a small percentage, and there's just going to be a lot of red tape. And these, people, Blackstone, Invitation Homes, they have a lot of backing, they have a lot of money, and they're going to fight till the end so this doesn't get banned. And they have some powerful people to be able to fight that. So I'm not sure if that's going to get passed. And then the other thing is, yes, investors are buying a lot of homes, but most of them are mom and pop. People like me and you. You probably have some good-hearted family members that own single-family homes. So that may not do anything. So I'm not sure. And even if they ban institutional investors from buying single-family homes, I don't think it's going to lower home prices. And I don't think it's going to increase supply so much. I don't see a big jump in supply or such a drop in home prices. Maybe the price appreciation will flatline, right? But it's not going to drop 5% or even 10%. So we'll see. All right, you all. I hope you all enjoyed this video, this live. I'm trying to go live at least once a week. Make sure you all like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you all later. Peace.